Well, there's been a lot of talk that Mike Huckabee isn't going to run for president. But one thing that we've yet to do here at stevedeace.com is analyze what happens if he does. Last Friday, our former broadcast partner, contributor Jen Green, guest hosted on WHO Radio. She brought me on to analyze where things stood in the caucus field about 10 and a half months before Iowans go to the polls to cast the first official votes in the 2012 presidential election. And I broke it down really into two scenarios. What happens if Huckabee doesn't run, and then what happens if Huckabee does run. So today on our daily diatribe, we're going to take a look at the latter. What indeed happens if Mike Huckabee does run? Now, I think that scenario breaks down into two additional scenarios. What happens if Huckabee is in the Iowa straw poll, and then what happens if Huckabee is not in the Iowa straw poll. Well, let's start with that one first. Can Mike Huckabee still win the Iowa caucuses without being in the Iowa straw poll? Well, I think it makes it very difficult. But there is one path that I think there is to victory still for Mike Huckabee if indeed he decides to bypass the Iowa straw poll. But it's the only path that I can foresee, and it's the riskiest one of them all. To me, I think the only way Mike Huckabee can win the Iowa caucuses, if he's not in the Iowa straw poll, is if it becomes obvious after the straw poll that there's not going to be sort of a Tea Party / social conservative grassroots, alternative to more of the establishment candidates, such as a Mitt Romney, such as a Newt Gingrich. That means that coming out of the straw poll, a Michelle Bachmann, a Tim Pawlenty, a Herman Cain, they failed to catch fire. They failed to really capture the attention and the imagination of Iowans. And it's pretty clear that there's a line between the establishment candidates and their more conservative alternatives. Now, it's probably not fair looking at Newt Gingrich's record in office to cast him as some kind of a moderate, because it's actually pretty conservative. But some of Newt's politicking since he's left office is what has a lot of people wondering if indeed he's turned moderate. Of course, the videos with Nancy Pelosi, the global warming appearances with John Kerry, the support of the TARP bailout program. Although his record as a congressman, his record in Washington politically, is more conservative than the typical establishment candidate, still he's seen as an establishment guy. So if we come out of the straw poll and it appears that none of the grassroots conservative alternatives, in fact, I'm not sure why I've got Pawlenty in that group, because the reality is Gingrich's record in office is more conservative, more than likely, than Pawlenty's. But Pawlenty, because he's a newer candidate, he's an emerging candidate, he sort of is seen as a grassroots type of a candidate. So if it doesn't look like any of the newbies have caught any fire at all, then I do think there could be a scenario, particularly amongst social conservatives, where there could almost be a clamoring for a draft Mike Huckabee, hoping that the former Arkansas governor and 2008 Iowa caucus winner comes riding in to the Iowa caucuses on a white horse. But I think that's a very dangerous, risky scenario for Mike, because by doing that, he's gambling that none of the other candidates catch fire, that Iowans demonstrate a very high amount of patience, which typically isn't the case. Usually by the straw poll, a lot of Iowans have sort of latched on to a candidate, or at least a couple of candidates that they're considering supporting. So for Huckabee to wait until after the straw poll, I think that's the riskiest scenario. And the only scenario I can foresee that it would work would require that essentially, other than Newt Gingrich or Mitt Romney, none of the other new candidates, the conservative candidates, the Tea Party, social conservative candidates, have been able to gather any kind of momentum, and they are just simply not seen as presidential material or clear contenders for the Iowa caucuses. And then I think the grassroots could then essentially beg or draft Mike Huckabee to run in that scenario. So that's, I think, what happens if Mike Huckabee runs, but it's after the straw poll. To me, I think a better strategic situation for him is to definitely run before the straw poll. In fact, I think the best strategic position for Mike Huckabee to have been in all along is to have already announced. To me, if I've got 500 radio stations, I've got the highest name ID of any Republican presidential candidate, probably not named Newt Gingrich, who's a former Speaker of the House. I'm on Fox News every single day of the week. I've got a highly rated weekly cable television show, and I was the runner-up in the caucuses the last go-around. Now, if it's me, if I'm going to run for president, I'm coming in like King Kong. I mean, I'm coming in early and I'm coming in strong. And I'm going to send a message. This isn't going to be a 12-month ordeal or a 50-state competition, that I'm the next man in line. And the Republican Party typically likes to nominate the next white guy in line. So if I were advising Mike Huckabee, that's what I would have advised. But of course, Mike is a praying kind of man. Maybe doesn't feel the leading yet from God that this is exactly what he's supposed to be doing. So I'm only analyzing this. I'm not looking at this totally yet in a spiritual context, strictly from a political, analytical one. And politically for me, if I had all the advantages that Mike Huckabee had, and I had a desire to be president, I'd have came in strong and leveled people and not taken the risk that someone like, say, a Michelle Bachmann could maybe capture enough imagination and slice away a big enough sliver of my support that it hands it in February of 2012 to a more establishment candidate. Now, if Huckabee comes in before the Iowa straw poll, he, of course, becomes the odds-on favorite to win the Iowa caucuses. And I really think Huckabee's fortunes are sort of tied to the person who I just mentioned, and that's Michelle Bachmann. It's almost as if Michelle Bachmann and Mike Huckabee, in my opinion, they can't really occupy the same space at the exact same time. She has advantages over Mike. She's beloved by social conservatives, Christian homeschooled mom, but unlike Mike, who had a lot of attack ads ran against him by the FICONs and the Club for Growth, Michelle Bachmann's a champion of the Tea Party. She's really the beauty queen. And I mean that as a compliment of the national Tea Party movement. She is seen as a strong fiscal conservative. However, Mike Huckabee has advantages over her. He has higher name ID, for example. He's got more proven presidential experience, spending 10 years as an executive. That's one knock on Michelle Bachmann. Can she really run a country? She's never really ran anything, although she's a very beloved congresswoman by conservatives across the country. And although Michelle Bachmann is a very good communicator, in my opinion, Mike Huckabee is really a gifted one. I mean, he has the gift of gab that you don't see a lot in this day and age. So what's interesting is those two individuals, and they both are very charismatic, they're going to go after a lot of the same kind of voters. And they each sort of complement one another's weaknesses and strengths. So if I'm Mike Huckabee, the person I'm the most concerned about is Michelle Bachmann. Because when I ran against Mitt Romney as the clear alternative to the establishment in 2008, when Mike Huckabee did that, there wasn't anybody even close to being in his league that could split his own vote. And that's why he ended up with 34%. And frankly, if he had more money to spend in 2008 and could have built an even bigger organization, he might have gotten over 40% and had an even bigger win. But this time around, Michelle Bachmann will have money. She will have an organization with the backing of a very popular state senator, Ken Sorensen. So to me, I think what will be interesting is what happens if there's Michelle Bachmann and Mike Huckabee in the race. Now, I would clearly favor Mike Huckabee over Michelle Bachmann. But if I'm a Newt Gingrich or I'm a Mitt Romney, I'm going to watch that very closely because I could see Michelle Bachmann having enough of a presence that she could do to Mike Huckabee in Iowa what Fred Thompson did to him in South Carolina in 2008. And that is, she can't beat him, but perhaps do enough to damage him that it makes it harder for him to coalesce his support to get what he needs to hold off the establishment candidate on the other side of the pie. That's our analysis today at stevedeace.com. Thanks for joining us. Make sure to email us, steve@stevedeace.com. You can find us on Facebook and also on Twitter at steve_deace. God bless.